I love the idea that there was so much color in the hieroglyphs, look at the blue ceiling in contrast with the yellow, and imagine how it would have looked in period. It would have been phenomenal. And it kind of matches up with, if we want to leave ancient Egypt for a moment, with the kind of polychromy that we have in ancient Rome. In this video here that I posted a while ago, I was actually showing this. This is an original mural that is found in Pompeii in ancient Rome. And what's fascinating is not only, I mean, the state of preservation of the colors is nice, but imagine what they would have looked like in period, fresh and colorful. But it also gives us a perspective, a picture that freezes in time how they saw their world. And the way they saw the world, they saw a woman in their beautiful purples and yellows and what is this, a turquoise, and everyone is wearing colors. So stop with the freaking browns and blacks everywhere. But also look, their walls were painted, their columns were painted. And as we see a statue, it is in full color. Even the clothes and the skin and the hair of the statue itself is in full color. This is one of the most beautiful aspects, I think, of classical antiquity, how everything was in color. And the visible traces are still there for us if you're interested enough to look, because we have this image of the columns being white, which is beautiful. I mean, Renaissance art did produce statues that were all white, columns that were all white. It is a style. It's just that it's not the style of classical antiquity, because the style of classical antiquity is Mediterranean polychromy. And look at this. You can still see red and green. Man, red and green. And then I see blue and yellow. This is like, wow, they really went full in. Also because remember, color, it's not just a representation of art, it's a representation of wealth. Because you got the money and you can show off not all colors at the same price. Yellow, for instance, is not too difficult to produce. But if you want green, particularly if you're dyeing garments, then you have to first dye it yellow and then do a second processing to get to green. When it comes to blue, it depends. There is cheap blue, there is expensive blue, there are various. Purple, man, you are Elon Musk of ancient antiquity. If classical antiquity, if you can afford purples. And so like, yeah, color is also a representation of how wealthy and successful you are. So color has layers to it that give us access to also the socio-economic positions and realities behind the artist or the commissioning. Exactly, yeah. And so it speaks to us. And that's also one more reasons why we can see why the ancients would want to show off their colors. And when we look at the Augusto di Prima Porta, which is currently found in the Vatican museums, and I speak about it many times. So for the regulars of my streams, I can understand that you may be like, oh my gosh, not again. I understand, but Octavianus Augustus is my favorite, so I will never stop talking about him, about the guy. But yeah, I think I've seen this receiving all sorts of different possible interpretations. I think imagine how much this would cost. Like, you have to crush 10,000 seashells that are only found in a specific area of northern Africa. I think it would be where Tunisia is now, so former Carthage, maybe in Algeria in some areas, but generally speaking, I would say Carthage is one of in Libya maybe. Anyways, this was so expensive to produce that, yeah, he's an emperor. This is his power. In a way, it's a representation of his legacy. And then, yeah, even his armor. I don't know if the armor would have been in color, but maybe the statue could be. And as I often say, his eyes would have been blue or gray. Difficult to say because of translation issues with ancient Greek and Latin. I would have made his hair, definitely his hair was brown, but I would have made it a light brown. That would have been a good representation of his hair because the Romans use a term in Latin, which is used, basically they have this term that represents blonde for the Germanic people. And then for him specifically, they add the term sub, which you could translate like even today, it's like a sub something, like something that is a little underneath it. So it's not quite blonde, but kind of on that direction. That's how I think you can translate his hair, which would have been like a light, maybe even a very light brown. I'm happy to consider this. And do remember, as I often point out, that the arm is not original. His original right arm was holding a spear, business end to the ground. And that's, yeah, so this is what classical antiquity, the idea that we see this is more like the art in the Renaissance. Someone like a David by Michelangelo, they would be full white because it's a representation of purity. And also it kind of dehumanizes the statue. I love it, by the way. I think it looks really good. But general, these kind of statues want to dehumanize it and perhaps go into a realm of a little bit of an uncanny valley, but strangely enough, one that I may find positive because I like it a lot. And so this looks like a demigod. And that's really what they wanted to recreate in the Renaissance, particularly with heroic art. And that we see that in armor as well. But classical antiquity, no. Ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt, all being civilizations that were nurtured by the Mediterranean basin. Now for them, the statues needed to be lifelike. The statues were alive. So the emperor, if you stand in front of the statue of Octavianus Augustus, it's as if you are looking and beholding his countenance, as if he were standing in front of you. In a way, in my opinion, is a connection to the idea of immortality. Because these statues are there and they will stay forever, at least in their opinion. They didn't. I mean, 2,000 years, it's impressive they're still standing. But they will stay forever in this state, which is the state of life. And that's the way the Mediterranean eye, in an artistic perspective, saw their representation in stone as they carved the people. So, yeah, they're two different approaches. And yeah, he was rich. Oh, the guy was rich. My gosh, the guy was rich. Yeah, so I love this about the Mediterranean cultures, and it is one connection, in a way, between cultures that are so different, because ancient Egypt being an African culture, Greece and Rome be European cultures, but still this was a point of connection, and it's, of course there is a point of connection. Look at this. Of course there is a point of connection because there is the Mediterranean Sea, which is a conduit of civilization, culture, and artistic expression. These civilizations continuously interacted with each other, they traded with each other, they learned from each other. As I was discussing the other day, the way the Romans and the Greeks built their minings, because they had 3 different approaches to mining for raw material, and one of their approaches was, for example, to go up a river, and then if they can find gold and silver inside the river, great. Sometimes they would follow a river up to a mountain, because that they found out, basically it's kind of like a statistic analysis. It's incredible that they could do that, but they could. They figured out where there was the highest likelihood of finding interesting materials that they could work with, whether it be iron, ore, or whether it be silver, gems, and whatnot. And they noticed that if you follow a river, this is in the sources, Pliny the Elder is one of them that mentions this, but also Marshall, I believe. They could follow the river, then they would start digging horizontally into the mountain, and usually that would give them access to raw material. But sometimes, and they only did it with silver and gold, they would dig vertically down up to 200 meters under the ground. But in order to, when they did, and they only did it with silver and gold because it was expensive and it was dangerous, they could lose manpower, but they would do it for gold and silver. And what's interesting is that as they were going down these shafts under the ground, they would encounter several problems. They had to solve the problem of darkness. The way they did it is fascinating, because we are told by the sources that they would wear a candle on their heads. So a bit like modern day flashlight when we connect it to the helmet, the Romans and the Greeks did that already. Sometimes they would carry clay with a little, what do you call it, a wickle is it called? That you could ignite and produce a fire. They would do that. That's mentioned in the sources. That's how they would deal with darkness and still be able to use both hands to work. And they had to deal with oxygen. And the way they did it, they had a system that used candles that would they would descend these candles under the ground, and by the way the flame would move, they would know if they had enough oxygen or not. So they understood how to probe for airflow. Another thing that they had to deal with was heat, because the further down you go, I actually looked at a study that tells you specifically of how many degrees Celsius you increase the temperature by a certain set amount of meters that you go underneath. I don't remember the exact number, but it's been calculated. And even though the Romans didn't have the same solutions that we have today, because we can dig thousands, 2 or even 3, 4,000 meters under the ground with deep digging. The Romans were going 200 meters, but already when you go 150 meters, it's a problem with heat. And so the Romans had ways to address that in order to create artificial airflows and ventilation. They had systems to do that. And the last one that kind of connects to this, as I wrap up this discussion, was how they had to deal with water. Because as you go down, you could run into an underground river or a water table, and if that happens, it would flood the whole thing. And since when the Romans dug, they first dug vertically, but when they find ore, like silver, gold, then they start digging horizontally. I've been told that that's what you do in Minecraft. I don't know. But anyways, that's what they would do. But when they would dig horizontally, they would dig in a way that they had a little bit of space, and the sources tell us that the miners couldn't even sit. They had to dig laying on their backs and dig like this. Imagine the claustrophobic whatever. But of course, if they keep digging and then they get into an underground river, it could flood the whole thing. And so the way they solved that is by creating a mechanism that would basically a machine, if you will, made of wood, iron and bronze, that could pump out water and push it up into the ground, and a significant amount of water if we are to believe the sources. And this machine was produced using a specific technique that the Romans learned from the Greeks and the Greeks learned from the Egyptians, that was called the Egyptian screw. And it was used to create this machine. This bronze screw was used to create this machine that could pump out the water. Fascinating stuff. I don't even know how I got there right now. I kind of got lost into the source. But yeah, so there is I love when I look at this, honestly, and see how these ancient civilizations functioned. It's fascinating stuff.